Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents A Modern Guide to Heathenry, Lore, Celebrations, and Mysteries of the Northern Traditions, by Galina, Krasskova. Foreword by Edward P. Butler, Ph.D. Narrated by Anne Richardson. Foreword. A Modern Guide to Heathenry is a book that is at once accessible to the newcomer and yet written from a perspective of intense scholarly and devotional engagement. It is the determined work of an author who does not compromise on her vision of a heathenry that can someday claim its space as one of the world's great living religious traditions. It not only expects this of the community, it demands it. Here, Galina Krasskova presents the Northern traditions as open to change and novelty, not in spite of, but precisely because of their secure grounding in a body of lore, but most of all as an essential corollary of engagement with their living gods. The book reflects the significant growth of the heathen community in numbers and complexity, as well as Krasskova's own spiritual and intellectual journey, during which she has published prolifically works both popular and academic on heathenry as well as on other topics pertaining to polytheism and the devotional life. She has a deep conviction concerning the importance of theological inquiry for every stage of heathen practice, that it is never too soon for the new worshipper to integrate theological reflection into their devotional life, that the struggle to understand the nature of the gods to the best of our human ability, as individuals and as spiritual communities alike, is a worthwhile endeavor, and that this process of reflection is never complete. This labor involves an engagement with the myths and rites that, catalyzed by the presence of the gods themselves, brings them to life in our spiritual now, so that the entire sense of tradition is rendered dynamic, along with the role of the individual involved in practice. Krasskova also addresses the challenges faced by devotees of any polytheism in a culture where the voices of monotheism and of atheism are hegemonic, and offers practical measures against the corrosive effect that the surrounding culture can have upon one's devotional work. Krasskova's steadfast determination to put the gods themselves first in all things informs her presentation of the Norse pantheon. She distances herself from interpretations of the lore which would cast certain deities as evil. This arises directly from her guiding principle that nothing should obstruct the possibility of any of the gods receiving the devotion which they are due, or the flexibility in interpreting that god's cosmic work which supports that engagement. This applies whether the interpretation is imparted to individuals or to communities collectively. In this respect, she is rigorously even-handed with regard to both the commitments that would tie certain individuals to certain gods and those that would lead others to exclude those gods from their worship. The virtue of a polytheist community is precisely that these differences can be accommodated and all the gods honored as befits them in the system as a whole, but that no single tradition need worship all the gods or worship them all in the same fashion. This book is a model, too, for the wider polytheist community beyond heathenry, for how other polytheisms ought to present themselves to newcomers to their own traditions, as well as to each other as fierce defenders of their traditions, but cognizant at the same time that tradition is never an end in itself, but rather a means of contact with the gods, and as such always further perfectible. The necessity of recognizing this is more evident in the case of traditions which, like heathenry, were historically sundered and had to be revived from materials inevitably incomplete and even corrupted. The heathen lore, as such, cannot be treated as a sealed corpus, either as to its contents or their interpretation. But in the necessity of reconstruction and reinterpretation, there is a lesson, potentially for the world's continuous polytheist traditions as well. Namely, that the reception of tradition is never complete, because the gods remain engaged with the world and do not stand either solely at the beginning or at the end of history. We must continue, rather, to seek them within it. Edward P. Butler, Ph.D., author of Essays on a Polytheistic Philosophy of Religion. Preface. I'm delighted to see the publication of this new edition of what was first issued as Exploring the Northern Tradition. This was my second book, first published in 2004, and my first attempt to fill what was then a gaping chasm in the literary world of heathenry: the lack of good, solid books for newcomers and beginners. In the intervening years, heathenry, all the many denominations that make up the Northern tradition, has grown and grown, more than I ever could have foreseen. My own understanding of this body of traditions has grown too. Rereading my original text, I was gratified to see that while the lay of the land, as it were, within heathenry, may have changed a bit over the years, my own theological comprehension of this tradition has only deepened. Someone wrote me last year complaining that my writing and devotional life had changed, and I thought, gods, I hope so. It is such an amazing time to be heathen, to be a polytheist of any tradition. We are engaged in the restoration of our ancestral traditions, of rebuilding what was sundered so many generations ago. We are restoring to our gods, our ancestors, and ourselves too, and all who will come after us, those ancient covenants that once bound our ancestors so strongly in piety, devotion, and a comprehension of the sacred that we, for all of our modern enlightenment, have sadly lost. It's a powerful time to be a polytheist, and as you take your first faltering steps into this tradition, know that you're not alone. All over the world there are people doing the same thing, struggling to find their way, to root themselves once more in the beauty of these traditions. Insofar as the contents of this volume go, I've added more material on devotional work, honoring the ancestors, and theological exegesis. If I could pinpoint the area in which my own understanding has grown the most, it would be in the importance of venerating our dead. It's not that I neglected this all those years ago, but I don't think that when I first wrote this book I realized how absolutely crucial it is. So I have expanded upon that, and also added a few updated references in the bibliography. Like any religion, heathenry is rife with theological differences, ideological conflicts, and different attitudes on how to do it right. I urge you not to allow the online community or any controversies you might encounter to scare you away. There are thousands of good, solid, deeply devout heathens out there. It's just a matter of finding those with whom you resonate in approach, practice, and piety. Don't compromise on your love and devotion for the gods and the needs of your tradition. In the end, what's important is what happens in the secret fastness of our hearts, before our gods, before our honored dead. Let us pray to make them proud. I hope this book will be a useful addition to your library. I hope it will benefit you who are seeking to learn more about the Norse gods and the traditions that hold their mysteries. May the gods bless. Galina, Krasskova, Beacon, New York, June 27, 2018. Introduction. To most people, the word heathen is a pejorative, usually taken to indicate a godless or uncivilized person. If the listener is particularly enlightened, it may instead be understood to refer to one who does not worship the Abrahamic God, which is at least partially accurate. What most folks fail to realize is that today, heathen has also come to designate a unique and sacred identity for those who have returned to the worship of the pre-Christian gods of Northern Europe. In fact, there is a growing religious movement, not only in America, but across the world, of people who have chosen to honor the gods and goddesses of the pre-Christian Scandinavian, Germanic, and English world. They belong to a number of denominations in the modern rebirth of an ancient faith and call themselves heathens. In the following chapters, we will examine why. Thousands and thousands of people are reconstructing the ancient rites, praying to the ancient gods, Odin, Thor, Frigga, Freya, and their kin, and remembering and honoring their ancestors in ways that reflect the wisdom and knowledge of this sacred tradition. I became heathen in 1996. By that time, I had been for a number of years a priest in the Fellowship of Isis, an eclectic pagan organization dedicated to the promulgation and exploration of goddess spirituality. I was an experienced ritual worker with a well-defined personal theology of practice. I never, ever expected to end up heathen. In the many years that I have been heathen, I have seen my religious community grow and evolve, developing a strong cultural identity. I have watched as our spiritual focus deepened, and as we began to examine our faith not only as religion, but also as a folkway, a set of cultural and ethical parameters by which we were committed to living as we practiced our faith. One thing I have seen to be lacking, however, is an effective way to welcome newcomers into the tradition. Not only did I never expect to find myself drawn to heathenry, in fact, I had a rather negative impression of it precisely because of the lack of friendly outreach, but there were many things about the religion that attracted me. First and foremost, I became heathen because I fell in love with the god Odin, to use the Anglo-Saxon name for Odin. Certainly, I appreciated the strong warrior ethic found in heathenry, but for the most part, I was seduced by Odin. If not for that attachment and devotion, it would have taken me far longer to accept the identity of heathen. This makes me unusual among heathens, because the impetus that drew me to heathenry was not lore, culture, or ethics. I came to heathenry because of personal experience with a particular god, and I came with several years as a priest and pastoral counselor under my belt. Those experiences have continued to define my beliefs and practice. There are two terms that anyone interested in heathenry should be familiar with. The first is lore. Anyone with even passing familiarity with Ásatru and heathenry will hear the word lore used by practitioners, often accompanied by quotes from obscure Icelandic or Germanic texts. For the modern heathen, much of the practical application of our sacred tradition is drawn from clues found in the Icelandic sagas, the poetic and prose Eddas, Anglo-Saxon historical, legal, and medical texts, as well as modern archaeological, linguistic, and anthropological research. Studying these texts is very nearly a devotional experience for most heathens, and this body of work is generally referred to as the lore. Heathens explore and debate these texts in much the same way a traditional Talmudic scholar might explore and debate the commentary on the Torah. In some cases, unfortunately, such debate has taken the place of personal devotion. In others, it naturally augments and supports devotion. But for anyone coming into heathenry, a basic knowledge of at least the Eddas and Icelandic sagas is essential. Such knowledge will go a long way toward ensuring a warm welcome from the community at large. Because we as heathens are seeking to restore a spiritual and cultural tradition that was largely destroyed by the arrival and spread of Christianity across Europe, we draw upon clues found in the lore to ensure that our practices are as consistent with the practices of our ancestors as possible. While changes and additions are being made, Given that we live in a drastically different time and place, they are done within a coherent historical and lore-based framework. This ensures that our modern religion remains attuned to the spirit of the original practice. While we don't know exactly how pre-Christian heathens practiced, we can draw reasonable conclusions from what survived. The second term one should be familiar with is UPG. UPG stands for Unverified Personal Gnosis. Within the heathen community, this term is used for those experiences and spiritual epiphanies that, while very powerful on an individual level, are completely unverifiable through surviving heathen lore. Acceptance of UPGs varies from community to community, with some granting far more credence to direct experience than others. One of the major divisions within heathenry today concerns what should hold greater prominence, experience or doctrinal orthodoxy. As a priest, I've long believed that the two should walk hand in hand. Mysticism, that is, personal experience, is limited, if not useless, without the ability to conceptualize it. Lore provides the framework in which those direct experiences can be processed, understood, and communicated. At the same time, there comes a point at which the authority of lore must bow its head to the realities of experience, or risk becoming a brittle parody of spirituality. There are times when a given UPG is found so commonly across all segments of the community that it becomes accepted as modern lore. For instance, it is commonly accepted in modern heathenry that the Valknot, a sacred symbol comprised of 3 interlocking triangles, is sacred to the god Odin. Nowhere in the surviving lore is this stated. The Valknot, however, is found carved on several rune stones, in every case in association with sacrifice, warriors, and the Valkyries, all things strongly associated with Odin in the lore. Modern heathens, through personal experience with this god, have taken this to its reasonably logical conclusion and given him the symbol. It would take a bold heathen indeed to wear a Valknot when he or she was not dedicated to Odin. Another commonly accepted UPG is that the goddess Freya likes offerings of strawberries. It's not written anywhere in the lore, but so many people have had this particular UPG in the heathen community that it has gained overall acceptance. Understanding the difference between these two terms and being able to accurately clarify when an experience is UPG and when it is soundly grounded in lore is a necessity within heathenry. By and large, the heathen community is fairly conservative. Change is accepted slowly and only after much consideration. In our efforts to maintain our cultural and religious integrity, UPG is occasionally greeted with skepticism. There is a deep aversion to neo-paganism, and particularly to eclectic Wicca among most heathens. Heathenry is not a neo-pagan faith, nor does it bear any connection to Wicca. We do, however, have many converts coming from Wicca and generic neo-paganism, and there is something of a backlash within the community against any lingering neo-pagan influence. Most modern heathens guard the integrity of their religious culture assiduously. This creates some problems for the newcomer, which I hope to address in this book. Few of us were raised honoring the gods and goddesses. Most of us were raised in Christianity. For many raised in the fundamentalist denominations of the monotheist religions, coming to an awareness of and devotion to the heathen gods can be a terrifying experience, often fraught with guilt. Converting to any religion has its difficulties. Converting to the worship of gods one has traditionally been thought to think of as non-existent, or in many cases as evil, can be all the more difficult. There are few resources in the heathen community to smooth such a transition. If the convert is very lucky, he or she will find a competent heathen clergy person who remembers the difficulties of her own early days in the religion. But often, that is simply not the case. There is no one available. There is no heathen community where the new convert lives, or the only clergy available in the local heathen community have given little thought to the subtleties of the conversion process and are untrained in pastoral counseling. The online environment is harsh and often unfriendly to the newcomer who may know little of lore or heathen social structure. The only books out there are either out of date or geared toward the New Age community, rather than the heathen. Often there is no family support during this time. It can be a frustrating experience. One helpful thing to remember is that our spirituality did not evolve in a vacuum. It's not a matter of excising the lessons with which we were brought up, but of evolving and adding yet another layer to the tapestry of our sacred landscape. For instance, I was raised Catholic, and though I left the church when quite young, I still draw immense spiritual nourishment from the writings of the Rhine mystics, from C.S. Lewis, and from renegade modern mystic Matthew Fox. It was from my Catholic grandmother that I first learned to value the spiritual, and from the writings of the Rhine mystics, long-dead women of a religion I no longer practice, that I learned the importance of prayer, and more importantly, how to pray. None of us come to the gods as blank slates. Therefore, for one newly emerging into the heathen faith, it's important to realize that it's okay to cull the beautiful devotional aspects of one's prior faith, if any. There's nothing wrong with that. It provides a bridge to the new, and this is a good thing. While purists may rage against anything smacking of syncretization, it is often a necessary and usually temporary step in one's spiritual journey. Understand this, and if necessary, allow yourself the necessary transitional time. Moreover, there are commonalities to spiritual experience that transcend the barriers of denomination and religion. Great comfort and understanding can be achieved by the reading of shared experience, even if that experience occurs across religious lines. Find what nourishes you. Find those things that help you move forward toward greater awareness of the gods. These are good and essential building blocks of faith. This is actually something of a heretical idea in most heathen circles, but the realities of conversion vary greatly from person to person. It is a simple fact that some may need the added comfort of that transitional time. The way in which we begin to allow ourselves to see the gods is determined largely by the religion in which we were raised. Rather than fighting against that, it is far more effective to use it to one's advantage. Throughout the course of this book, I will provide suggestions and exercises to aid the newcomer to heathenry, not only in learning about our gods and learning about lore, but in developing a strong personal discipline of devotion. Without that devotion, it is impossible to develop a strong faith and impossible for our traditions to grow. In the following chapters, I will take you through everything you need to know to confidently enter into the heathen community, from the history of heathenry and its modern rebirth to our fundamental theological tenets. We will examine the ethics and values of modern heathenry, the nature of our gods and goddesses, the fundamentals of heathen rituals, and the building blocks of personal devotion. It is my sincere hope that this simple volume provides a thorough introduction to heathenry, not only for the new convert, but for anyone interested in learning about the modern resurgence of an ancient indigenous faith. Chapter 1. The Evolution of Modern Heathenry. There was a time when Northern Europe was completely heathen. Of course, the term heathenry wasn't used. That came later with the imposition of Christianity and the need to give a derogatory name to the old religious beliefs that were not so easily discarded by the people. there was no specific name for the common faith practiced by the Germanic, Scandinavian, and English tribes, and none was needed. It was simply what they believed, what their ancestors before them had believed, and what had kept their community strong and whole for generations. Fragments of their practices have come down to us in the Eddas, sagas, histories, medical charms, and even Christian ecclesiastical writings. Theirs was not a single religion, as modern theology might define it, but a collection of tribal religions with a common, cohesive, cosmological core. They shared a belief in the same gods, though many regional variations on the divine names were known. They shared a common system of honoring those gods, common ethics and values, and widespread veneration of their honored dead. At various times in various regions, different gods may have held local prominence, but the core beliefs were similar. As early as 98 CE, the Roman historian Tacitus recorded the religious practices of the British Isles, noting that their holy places are woods and groves, and they apply the names of deities to that hidden presence which is seen only by the eye of reverence. He examined at length the various governments of the Germanic tribes, their social customs, and the high regard in which they held their women. His is the only surviving record of the goddess Nerthus, whose worship was once widespread throughout the north. Another important source of information was the eyewitness accounts of Arab travelers Ibn Fadlan and al-Tartushi. Given that the Germanic and Scandinavian traditions were primarily oral, we are forced to rely on these accounts of travelers, traders, and diplomats, and on the writings of Christian historians and poets for most of what we know about their religious customs and beliefs. And most of that comes from the Viking Age, 800 to 1300 CE, a time of extensive interaction through trade, migration, and violent raiding. Viking trade routes spanned the continent of Europe, extending to what is now modern-day Russia, and even as far as the Ottoman Empire. At least 100 years after the fall of the last heathen temple in 1100, the Icelandic statesman and poet Snorri Sturluson committed to print the tales and sagas of the gods and heroes. In other areas of Europe, most notably Lithuania, indigenous polytheism wasn't suppressed until the 15th century. Today, more and more people are returning to these polytheisms, working to restore and cultivate their traditions in the modern age. Given the Vikings' extensive trade routes, the inevitable intermarriage with other cultures, the prevalence of Sami references in the context of Nordic magico-religious practices, the occasional reference in lore to folk who worshipped both Thor and Christ, and the ease with which early Christian healers combined heathen and Christian symbology in their healing charms, it's doubtful that there was any rigid heathen orthodoxy. Recent scholarship confirms that Viking Age Europe was a world of cultural interconnection between Anglo-Saxon, Balto-Finnic, Celtic, Sami, and Norse cultures. As with many polytheistic cultures, the initial attitude toward foreign gods was quite likely not hostile. Any religion they came into contact with prior to the advent of Christianity would have been grounded in the specific cultures of its adherents, providing a logical continuity of cosmological understanding, and would have borne no imperative to dissolve and destroy other beliefs. Unfortunately, this is precisely what occurred with Christianity. The arrival of Christianity in Northern Europe was inevitably followed by prohibitions against the practice of the indigenous faiths. Some of the more zealous converted Christian kings, such as Norway's Olaf Tryggvason, enforced those prohibitions with bloodthirsty zeal, torturing followers of the old gods with a viciousness matched only by the later Spanish Inquisition. Christianity appeared in England with the arrival of Augustine of Canterbury, sent at Pope Gregory's behest in 597. In less than 200 years, England was thoroughly Christianized, though heathen practices and customs apparently continued to coexist alongside the newfound faith. People did not readily give up their
Sample complete. Ready to continue?